Retool is one of the most powerful low-code tools for building internal applications for your team. Now you might hear low-code and think low-code, no-code, no-code, low-code, it's all the same. On this channel, a lot of the products that we cover are no-code tools. Because if you're a business owner or a person in operations, you have lots of industry knowledge, you have lots of functional knowledge, but you probably have a splash of technical knowledge and technical curiosity. And that's what makes tools like Airtable so popular, because you only need to have that splash of technical knowledge to get a lot of value from the application. Retool and low-code tools in general are much more technical in nature. It's helpful to have some Python knowledge, some JavaScript knowledge, be able to write SQL queries, add event handlers. And so you might be wondering, well, what's the value of a low-code application if no-code applications are so powerful? And the reason here is that many people hit a point where their no-code application suddenly doesn't let them do exactly what they want to do. The layout on the screen starts to feel a little bit constricted. You wish something would work a different way. Maybe the performance of the application isn't optimized for what you're trying to do. With no code, you're really at the mercy of the vendor to make a lot of these decisions for you. With low code, it requires additional technical expertise, but in exchange, you're getting more flexibility for how you build your applications. So what we see at Automation Helpers is many of our clients are perfectly content on no code tools. And then some hit kind of this block or barrier after a while and say, oh, I wish I could do this more advanced kind of thing. And so we're able to help migrate them from a no code solution to a low code solution that takes some technical overhead. But again, if you're working with a partner or someone with those technical skills, you can get a lot of value for what low code offers. Hi, I'm Dan Lehman from AutomationHelpers.com, and we help companies like yours get automated with portals, apps, and integrations. Let's just take a quick look at Retool's pricing, and then we're gonna jump into building on Retool itself. So if we take a look at the pricing, they have an awesome free plan. You can do everything that we're doing today directly on the free plan itself. This is going to give you access to unlimited applications that you can build. You've got 500 workflows a month. Those workflows are going to be like automations or like Zaps if you're using something like Zapier. You've got data storage, and there's an internal Postgres database where we can actually store our information. And you can have up to 5 users on the platform. So when we get into the more advanced plans, you can see there's this differentiation of pricing between standard users and end users. Standard users are going to be the people who are building or editing the applications themselves. End users are going to be people who are actually interacting with the applications. They're not building the application, but they're adding records, they're updating it, they're performing different actions. Really, that end user pricing is pretty affordable. You can see on the business plan, you're paying $15 per end user a month. That's much more affordable than other no-code tools where you're paying like $50 a month for people just to be able to access that application. Instead, on business, you're only paying $50 for the users who are actually building the applications, and most people are going to be interacting with the applications. A couple other pricing differentiators you can see on the business plan, you get access to authenticated embedded apps. So if you have a product with this legacy code base, you don't want to be building a dashboard in that tool, you want to build it in Retool, you can embed this directly in your application on the business plan. Custom React components, this is pretty cool. If you find that the out-of-the-box components aren't working for you, design your own, import them, and you can use them in your application. For mobile app functionality, there's a few different options. They've got PWAs. Out of the box, you're going to have mobile responsiveness for the apps that you're building. And there's also native mobile applications, but what that really means is that you're downloading the Retool app from the Play Store or the App Store, and then you're logging in to get your kind of experience. So it's not actually deploying your own app to a given store to be able to download. For workflows, I really love the way that this works. Instead of charging you per task like Zapier does or per operation like Make does, instead a workflow is going to be the entire execution of that workflow. So 500 workflow runs a month on the free plan is super, super generous. For the database, Retool provisions you your own Postgres database, and they don't have any limits to the rows or tables that you can have. There's only a storage limit of 5 gigabytes. So for those of you who are using a lot of other no-code applications that have these really strict limits on number of rows, this isn't going to be as much of an issue for you on Retool. There's really no limit to what you can connect to in terms of other APIs and data sources, even on the free plan. And then you can see there's a number of different security features which you're going to have access to as you go up to those increased plans. To get started with Retool, we want some sort of data that we can put into our database. Now, I've actually started building something in BuildShip. We wouldn't really need BuildShip with Retool, but I've already built it here, so we're going to use it anyways. So for today's use case, we're going to work with this idea that I want to analyze data of my competitors on YouTube, and I've been storing this information inside of a Google Sheet. You can see we have 248 records. These are all the videos that I have, and I want to add another channel to the data. So I'm going to come into BuildShip and we'll test out our call here. Because we're talking about Retool, let's go ahead and use Retool's own YouTube channel here. We'll test this workflow. It looks like it ran successfully. And if we look at our Google Sheet, we can scroll down and we can see there's now additional records that have been created around Retool's own videos. When we get logged into Retool, we can see all the different parts of the Retool platform up at the top here. So first we have our different apps. These are two that I've been working on that we'll be talking about today. We've got one for adding our YouTube channels and one for displaying our YouTube videos. Now, the thing that's kind of interesting about these applications are that these are single page applications, meaning that if we have different pieces of functionality like managing our channels and managing our videos, that these are actually two different applications and we can unite them together with a common navigation, but this might be a little bit different of a setup than you're familiar with. Next up, we have resources. We've got our database. We've got storage that we can use for file storage. We've got emails, so we can do transactional emails. We have a query library. This is where we can build different queries against our data sources that we can use across our different applications. We have workflows. These are the automations that happen in the background. And these workflows feel similar to a Make or a Zapier, but they're going to be much more technical in nature. There's new form functionality. This is going to allow you to create external forms for people outside of your applications. And last but not least, we've got our database, which is what we're going to do next. So when you first see your database, there's going to be some sample data here. Here's some sample users. And unlike many no-code applications where you build a new database for every single project you're doing, we really have one main Postgres database and we have different tables to store this information. Because we're not actually having our users interact with this data here, they're doing it via the application. This is simply storing that data on the back end, which means any of the fields that we might add are going to feel much more technical from a database standpoint on the back end. So we've got different field types, but you can see that this is something that's not quite like an Airtable where you say, oh, I'm just going to add a new formula or a rollup. All of that functionality is still possible, but we're not actually doing that at the database storage level. So to get started with your own data, you can add a table by pressing this plus button. We've got a few different ways to create the table. We can define the schema ourselves. We can import it from a CSV file, which is what we're going to be doing, or you can generate the schema with AI. Now, prior to hitting record, I had already created the schema here. So instead of deleting that, I'm just going to import the data that I have. But if you have your own CSV file with your own headers, it's very easy to import for the first time. So let's import CSV into our current table, and we'll click and upload our data. It's pretty good at being able to map the different field names as long as we're consistent here. And we've got an option where we're saying use the first row as headers. And let's import that. And there we go. We've got our video data imported. Now I've also added a table for channels. And this I didn't even have to do an import for. We just put that we have two channels. Here's the handle for my YouTube channel and then for Retool as well. And if we take a look at the data, again, a lot of this is just done as text fields. So I've got title and description, which makes sense, but then my tags, which you might imagine would be a multi-select or a tag kind of field, again, in the backend database, it's just stored as text. When we get to the front end side of our application, that's how we can control how it actually renders. So back on our apps page, let's go ahead and create our first app. And we're actually going to do this from a template. Now the templates I find more or less useful, but this one that we're going to use today is just our basic layout to help us get started. Now that our app has been created, you can see it's pretty simple. We've got some navigation items up at the top. We've got a table here. We've got a container which holds this table, and we've got our title. From a navigation standpoint, in terms of actually using this builder here, we've got our different components. You can see there's a ton of different options for components. Remember, you've got that ability to import your own. If you've built your own React components, you can do it. But there's so much to be able to do with the components that exist here. Next up, as we go down the side here, we've got our component tree. This tells us the different frames and the different components on each page. We have our code, and this is going to be where we add new resource queries to be able to actually pull information from the database to display it on the front end. And we've got some other items like being able to do a code search and look at our states and check out the history of what we've done. Right now, the data in this table is just dummy data. So let's go ahead and connect this to our own YouTube videos. To do this, we'll click on the code here. We'll create a new resource query. And then for our resource, you can see there's a number of different demo resources for us already available, but we are going to choose the one from our Retool database. We're not going to do a whole SQL primer here, but you can get started pretty easily and add information as you go along. For those of you coming from a no-code background, you might actually find it easier to switch from SQL mode into a GUI mode, because then you can just choose your tables directly and what kinds of actions you want to do. This feels a lot more familiar. In this case, our query is really simple. We're just saying select everything from our YouTube videos table. Let's go ahead and save and run. We can see our data showing up down here, so that looks good. And I'm probably going to rename this to something that makes more sense, like list videos. Then we can collapse this because we're not going to use it for now. Now we can click on our inspector and click on our table. And here's where we see all the information about our table. We might want to relabel this. And now let's connect it to our query we just built. So we'll click on demo data here, and now we can choose list videos. And you can see it automatically mapped this for us. So it's showing the different fields and the different records that we have. So let's clean this up a little bit. There's some fields I just don't need, like this ID here doesn't add any information for me. So let's hide that. We also don't really care about the YouTube ID, so we'll hide that as well. Our favorites, likes, and comments we can hide. I don't know what's going on with this channel ID, but we can hide that as well. Okay, so now we have some high-level information about our videos. We can adjust this as we see fit. Let's make the thumbnail the first column here, so I'll drag that up. And the thumbnail itself, we don't want to have it just display as a URL. So let's go ahead and open that up. And instead of being formatted as a link, let's have it show as an image. Now let's adjust the size of our rows so this looks a little bit better. We can change the row height from small, and we'll make this large. Cool. So already we can format our fields to make this look better on our screen. Let's do the same for our tags. Right now it just displays as text. We'll open up our tags, and we'll change this formatting of string. We can search for tags. In this case, it's going to be plural because there's more than one tag. But that information disappeared from our screen. So what do? Well, here we have our mapped values, and you can see it's kind of recommending, or it's got a placeholder for item. So let's put that in, item in these curly braces. Now these curly braces you're going to see everywhere because this is where we can manipulate our data and make changes that we need to. Item is that entire field, and we have lots of different tags. So in this case, we'll say item dot split, and we need to put in a comma and maybe a space as well. And so you can see we took those values and we split them by the comma. So now we can have these different individual tags. And we could, of course, expand this as well so we can see the different tags listed. Let's retitle our application. We'll press save. And at any point, we can toggle this to see what the experience is going to actually look like for our users. And at any point, we could click on our columns to be able to sort this different ways. So maybe I want to see our longest ago published videos, or maybe our most recently published videos, or we want to take a look at the view count. Here's the least popular to the most popular. Let's go ahead and add a couple more components to our application. So first, I should probably retitle this instead of users. We'll change it to videos. Let's go into our components and we'll search for statistic. Let's grab that statistic and drag it onto our screen. We'll put it up here. So in this case, maybe we want to show the number of views that we have. So let's change our label to views. And we'll call this video views. And instead of formatting it as a currency, we'll just do standard. Our values right now, this is just static, but we want this to be dynamic. And then in our value, we can use our curly braces again. And here's where we're going to reference our data, our query list videos. And from here, we'll pull from our data. And from our data, we'll use our view count. But you'll see that we have this error here. The value has to be of type number. We provided an array because we're giving it all of those different records. Instead, we want to be able to aggregate that. So we need to be able to sum up the number of views. Well, hey, we have JavaScript. So let's use Lodash. We use an underscore and a period. And we've got sum. We'll put that in a parenthesis and wrap our parentheses. And now we've got the total number of views. Well, right now we're showing a combination of my videos and Retool's videos. So really that's the total number of views. What if we just want to show one channel or the other? Let's add a new component for a select. We'll just choose a single select here and we'll add that in. We'll call this channel picker. And then we don't want to have to manually list out the channels. That would be a huge pain. For every new channel we add, then we'd have to be constantly updating this picker. So let's go into our code and create a new query. We'll create this as a resource query. We'll call this list channels. And now we'll say select all from channels. Save and run that. You can see we have our 2 channels that come back. And now instead of these manual options, we can click on mapped, and our data source is going to be from list channels. Now we actually don't want our value to be item.id. Instead, we want this to be item.channelid, but we don't want that label to show that long series of characters. So let's have the label be item.handle instead. And now when we click on this, we can see we have options between Dan Lehman and Retool. I'll change my label here to channel. So if I click the channel here and I select Retool, it's not doing anything right now. And there's several different ways to do this. We don't have to do it at the query level here. We could add our own event handler, but we'll modify this. So we'll say select from YouTube videos where channel ID equals, and then we can reference our channel picker and the value from that channel picker. So now I can click on Retool and it's only going to show me the Retool videos, or I could click on Dan Lehman and it'll only show me the Dan Lehman videos. And because this is all reactive, you can see the total number of views that we have. So you can see that for Dan Lehman, or you could see that for Retool. Next, let's talk about building our own workflow. We'll click on the workflows area, and I've created this one already for fetching channel information. So the idea behind this workflow is that I want to be able to copy and paste in a new YouTube channel, just paste that channel, and then I want to have it automatically come back with a channel ID, because later on when we want it to automatically import the YouTube videos that we have, we need to know that YouTube channel ID and we need to know their upload playlist. So now, could I do this with a tool like Make or Zapier? I could, however, it's going to take some code. Neither of those solutions actually have the correct module that we'd be looking for, so we'd have to write this as a custom API call anyway. And so this is going to be much easier for me to do just as a workflow, write a little bit of code, get the information I need, transform it where I need to. So first off, I have my start trigger. If I edit the trigger here, you can see that I can actually create multiple triggers for this workflow. That's pretty sweet. A lot of other automation applications don't do that. It's always you start from this one spot. In this case, you're basically starting from either a webhook. So you're saying, here's some action. I'm going to pass some information via a webhook, or basically a cron job. So if you want to schedule it, or you say a certain interval of time, midnight every day, we're going to run this job. In my case, I want to have the user actually do this because we're going to have a form that's going to then run this webhook. So I'm going to start with a webhook. We're going to pass it some JSON, and that JSON, in this case, this is just some test parameters. So I really like this. I don't have to constantly be going back to a different app and be triggering this. I can test it directly with the data in here with this test JSON parameters. So in this case, I'm using SmartSuite's channel. This is the data I'm going to feed it, is just feed in this full YouTube channel. And then in this step, this is where I'm running some code. You can do this either with JavaScript or with Python. And I'm basically defining the channel handle, and I'm saying, okay, well, let's split this at the @ symbol, because I really just care about this hello SmartSuite. I don't care about the previous portion of it. So we're going to split that data at the @ symbol, and then we're going to take the second component. And of course, with arrays in programming, the first element is at the 0 index, the second one is at the first index. So we're taking the second part of that, and then we're just going to return it. And then in the next step, I'm getting the channel ID. This is where I'm using a REST API, and I'm just doing this directly with YouTube. So I've set up an account with Google to be able to capture this information. I'm not doing any web scraping or anything like that. I'm going directly from the API, and I'm saying, okay, well, here's the GET request I want to make, and we're passing in that channel handle that we had in the previous step. So we can reference any of the data from our different workflow steps here. That's what I'm doing here. We're passing in our API key, and then that's all the information we need to grab that channel ID. And then in our next step, we've got some branching logic, and I really don't have another condition. To really flesh this out, I probably should, but I'm just checking to make sure that that channel ID is present, because what would happen if we pasted in some link that wasn't actually a YouTube channel link? Well, there'd be no YouTube channel present. So we're doing a check here to say, hey, when we actually get that data in the previous step, if those items come back and there is no ID for that channel, well, then we're not going to actually go ahead and progress with the next step. You don't have to know too much about this unless you're actually querying YouTube yourself, but I have another YouTube API call I'm making here then to actually grab the upload playlist for that particular YouTube channel. So that's the next step after we've checked if that channel ID is present. And then my last main step I'm doing here is with Retool's own database. So we're using Retool's database to write into the channels table, and we're taking all that information that we captured in the previous steps to be able to write that data and insert a new record in our channels table. And then finally here, just to show you, you can have the webhook actually return data as well. So if you want to capture some of that information and display it back to the front end, you can do that with a webhook response. So to trigger this from the front end, we're going to want to copy the URL of our webhook. Let's create a new app, again from template. We'll use the same template. This time we'll label it channels. We'll create a resource query. Now, because we're repeating ourselves here, what we should do is actually put this in our query library, but just to get the job done, we'll create this new query. We'll map that data to our table, and now you can see we have our list of channels. Let's add a new component. I'll search for a form. We'll take that form, we'll just add it here. We'll call this add channel. We'll click to generate this from a table. We'll add a component here, add a text input. We'll update our label to channel URL. We'll put in a placeholder just to help our users. Let's stretch out our submit button a little bit. Okay, so here is where we could add our channel, but right now it doesn't actually have any functionality to do anything. So let's go back into our code. We'll choose resource query. We'll call this something like get channel. And instead of our Retool database being the resource this time, if we scroll down, we should be able to see an option for a Retool workflow. Now we'll choose our workflow, fetch channel info. And then it's really nice because it shows us how to structure our JSON. It shows that we need that channel parameter, but we don't want this to actually be static information. We don't want it to always be for Smart Suite. So let's use our curly braces again, and we can reference our form 1 data. And from here, we can access that text input. Now, best practice, I should always be labeling this correctly instead of using these generic form 1 and text input 1. Let's go ahead and save this. And let's preview our application. We'll paste in a different YouTube channel here and press submit. And we can see that this ran successfully. Well, why didn't it do anything to our channels here? We didn't actually tell it to refresh. All we said was, hey, go ahead and execute this query. If I press refresh, we can see that we were in fact successful. We see that new channel additive softer, and then it pulled back that upload playlist ID. So this ran through our entire workflow that we had, but how do we actually get it to update so that we know that it worked successfully? Well, this is where we can go back into our resource query so we can add an event handler here as well. And this one will be what happens on success. Well, let's add a new one. So instead of controlling our query, when this successfully runs our workflow, we want to control a component, and we can select our component. This is going to be our channels table. And here we're going to choose to refresh that table. So now in our application, we should be able to add a new channel URL, press submit, and you can see it automatically ran the query, but it also updated the front end to add that new channel, run it through the workflow. We've got that upload playlist ID, and then be able to update what we see on the screen. Now, one more common question I get a lot from people who are used to no code is, well, how do we create those formulas? Because remember, there's no formula fields in our back-end database. Now, there's a couple ways to slice this. I'm going to show you how we can do it in our query. So let's go to list videos. And we've done select all, but in this case, I want to add my own field. So I'm going to add a comma here. I'm going to paste this in. I'm going to say the current date minus the published at date. And this is going to be a date type of field. And we're going to label this as days active. So what this means is we're able to manipulate our data and then show it to the front end. And the front end just looks at this like another field. Let's save and run our query. We'll close this. And now if we look at our videos table, we could add a column. For our source, we should be able to see we now have this days active. We'll render this as a number and we'll map the item. And now you can see we've got this new field in our table, days active. Doesn't actually exist in the database, but we essentially created that same kind of formula that we would in another no-code application. I hope this has been helpful to see just how powerful a tool like Retool can be. If you have any questions about your own no-code or low-code setup, don't hesitate to reach out to our website at automationhelpers.com, where we're offering free 30-minute consultations.